a single bronze bell, still hanging in the tower of St. Etheldreda's Church, Heatherset, Norfolk. 600 years of English weather, 2 world wars, 3 renovations, and it still rings every Sunday morning. The hands that cast it are dust. The foundry that shaped it has been a garden since the 1400s. What survives is the sound. The Braziers Guild Ledger of Norwich, one of the few such records to outlast the Middle Ages, holds an entry dated the Feast of St. Michael, 1386. Written in a cramped clerk's hand, it reads, "Aldrich Brazier, master founder, did undertake to cast 1 great bell of 20 hundredweight for the Church of Heatherset, at the commission of Prior Godfric, for the sum of 14 pounds sterling." 14 pounds. A small fortune in an age when a skilled laborer earned 2 pence a day. The foundry stood on Pottergate, in the heart of Norwich, England's second city, grown fat on wool money and Flemish trade. If you'd walked through that gate on an autumn morning in 1386, the first thing you'd notice wasn't the sight of it. It was the smell. Charcoal and copper, hot clay, horse dung mixed with loam, and underneath all of it, that metallic sweetness that sticks to your teeth, the smell of bronze being born.
You don't learn bell founding with your eyes, boy. You learn it with your nose. When the furnace smells like a forge, you're too cold. When it smells like a kitchen,
Do you hear me? I hear you.
you're too hot. The right heat smells like nothing else on God's earth.
That was Aldrich Brazier, 3rd generation in the craft. His grandfather had cast bells for Norwich Cathedral. His father had supplied half the churches in Norfolk, and Aldrich himself, hands scarred from 35 years of foundry burns, gray beard stained yellow with smoke, blue eyes that could read molten metal the way a priest reads scripture, believed one thing above everything. A founder lives and dies by his bells. One cracked casting, and a lifetime's reputation cracks with it. The commission from Prior Godfric wasn't just another church order. 20 hundredweight. That's over a ton of bronze, shaped into a single singing vessel. The largest bell Aldrich had ever attempted. And Godfric wanted perfection.
Brazier, Prior Godfric did cause me to be made. Every letter sharp enough to read from the ground. My legacy hangs in that tower.
Legacy. That word ran through this entire enterprise like a flaw through metal. Invisible at first, but determining everything. The process started, as all bell founding does, not with metal, but with earth. The bell would be born from clay, specifically from a mixture founders called loam. Clay, sand, horsehair, and horse dung worked together until it held shape without crumbling. Every bell begins as dirt. That's the first secret the guild protected. Aldrich's nephew Tomas had spent 6 years learning this craft. 22, lean from foundry labor, his hands already mapped with the white burn scars that mark every metal worker. He was building what founders call the core, the solid clay shape that forms the inside of the bell.
Layer by layer. Each coat dried by fire before the next goes on. Rush it, and the moisture turns to steam during the pour. Steam doesn't care what's in its way.
The boy understood, and he should. 6 years of 12-hour days in this yard had branded the knowledge into his body. Each layer of loam was painted onto a brick core, then dried over a slow fire, a process that took days. Around this inner core, Aldrich shaped the false bell, a wax and tallow layer in the exact profile of the finished bell. Every measurement mattered. Thickness at the lip, the waist, the shoulder, the crown. These dimensions determined the bell's note. Get them wrong by a quarter inch, and the bell sings flat. Or worse, it doesn't sing at all. And here's what the guild records don't tell you. what archaeology has had to piece together from Foundry ruins across medieval England. The 14th century bell founder worked without thermometers, without frequency analyzers, without any measuring instrument we'd recognize today. He carried the knowledge in his body, temperature by color, pitch by thickness, tone by weight and proportion, calculated through formulas passed mouth to ear, master to apprentice, across generations that left almost nothing written down. When a master bell founder died without passing on his secrets, those secrets died with him. Gone. Unrecoverable. The tin arrived from Cornwall on a Wednesday. Aldrich inspected every ingot himself, bit into one with his back teeth, held another against the light, weighed them in his palms like a merchant weighing souls. Bell bronze runs roughly 3 parts copper to 1 part tin. Too much tin and the bell fractures. Too little and it won't ring true. The margin for error is razor thin.
14 pounds sterling, and he stands there fondling tin like it's his firstborn. Aldrich, the copper's been weighed. Ralph needs the furnace loading order before dark.
Marjorie Brassier, Aldrich's wife and the Foundry's true organizer. Guild records almost never mention founders' wives, but account books don't lie, and the Brassier accounts were kept in Marjorie's hand. Over the next 3 weeks, the mold took shape. The false bell, that wax profile, was coated in an outer clay shell called the cope, built up layer by patient layer. When the cope dried hard, the whole assembly was heated, and the wax between core and shell melted away, leaving a hollow space in the precise shape of the bell. Lost wax casting, a technique older than Christianity, still used today because nothing better has replaced it. The casting pit was dug 6 feet deep in the foundry yard. The mold lowered in, earth packed tight around it. The furnace, charged with over a ton of copper and Cornish tin, needed to reach 1200 degrees. And on the night of the 3rd of November, 1386, Aldrich Brazier lit the fire. Everything he'd built, his name, his guild standing, his family's 3-generation reputation, now depended on what happened in the next 12 hours. One pour, one chance. And molten bronze forgives nothing. Dawn, the 4th of November, 1386. Aldrich Brassier hadn't slept. Nobody in the foundry had. The furnace had been burning since midnight. 4 hours of copper and tin climbing toward that invisible line between solid and liquid, between raw metal sitting cold and dead, and bronze. Bell founding records from the 14th century describe this moment in terms that border on prayer. And there's a reason for that. What was about to happen in this yard on Pottergate couldn't be undone, couldn't be paused, couldn't be corrected halfway through. Once the furnace was tapped and the bronze started to flow, nature took over. All a founder could do was watch and pray and hope that every decision he'd made in the past 3 months was the right one. The yard was quiet in a way that felt wrong. Ralph, the loam mixer, stood by the casting pit with long iron rods, ready to vent trapped gas from the mold. Tomas had positioned himself at the furnace tap, the clay plug that held back a ton of liquid metal. Marjorie watched from the foundry gate. She always watched the pours. 17 years of marriage, and she'd never missed one.
I know, Uncle.
You know because I have told you. Today you will know because you have done it.
Aldrich climbed the stone steps beside the furnace and squinted through the viewing slit. Inside, liquid fire. The bronze had passed from red to orange to a white gold that burned to look at directly. 1,200 degrees, give or take. Aldrich didn't measure degrees. He measured color. He'd learned the colors from his father, who'd learned them from his father. And this color was right. He raised his hand, dropped it. Tomas swung the iron bar. The clay tap shattered, and the bronze came. Nothing in the medieval world prepares you for the sight of molten bronze in open air. It doesn't flow like water. It rolls, thick, luminous, alive with its own terrible light. The channel from furnace to mold glowed white where the metal touched clay. The air above it shimmered and bent. And the sound, not a splash, not a pour, a deep, continuous roar, like something enormous drawing breath. The bronze hit the mold's entry gate and began to fill from the bottom. Aldrich watched the vent holes, small openings in the cope designed to release trapped air as metal displaced it. One by one, they started to smoke, then glow, then spit tiny fountains of orange bronze. Good. The metal was rising evenly, filling the bell-shaped void without turbulence or air pockets.
It's overheating!
And then, a sound that Aldrich Brazier had dreaded for 35 years.
No!
A crack. Not loud, almost gentle, like a branch settling in frost. But Aldrich's trained ear picked it out over the furnace roar, and his stomach dropped.
The runner channel. Tomas, look at the runner.
A hairline fracture had opened in the clay channel carrying bronze from furnace to mold. Not wide, not yet. But at 1,200 degrees, clay doesn't hold fractures. It opens them. If that channel split apart, a ton of liquid bronze would flood the casting pit, destroy the mold, and turn 3 months of work into a steaming ruin. Every man in the yard froze, except one. What happened next isn't recorded in any guild ledger. It survived only as a story Norwich founders told for generations. A story that shows what 6 years of apprenticeship actually means when the furnace is roaring and the metal is flowing and there's no time to think. Tomas grabbed a shovel of wet loam from the mixing trough. He ran toward the cracking channel, toward a river of liquid metal hot enough to take his arm clean off, and packed wet clay against the fracture with his bare hands.
Hold, you stubborn, hold.
The loam hissed and spat. Steam blasted upward. Tomas's right hand blistered from wrist to fingertips, the skin going white, then red, then raw. But the clay held. The patch sealed against the heat, and the bronze kept flowing. Through the repaired channel, down into the mold, rising inch by inch, filling the bell-shaped void. The pour lasted 11 minutes. It felt like 11 years. When the last bronze drained from the furnace and the flow slowed to a trickle, then stopped, the yard fell into a different kind of silence. Not the held breath silence of before. The stunned, ringing silence of men who've just watched something that should have killed them and didn't.
Nobody moves. Nobody touches anything.
Aldrich climbed down from the furnace platform, walked to where Tomas stood cradling his burned hand against his chest. The old founder took the boy's wrist without a word and examined the damage the way he'd examine a casting. Carefully, thoroughly, reading the injury like text. Then he did something the apprentice had never seen in 6 years. Aldrich's eyes filled. He nodded once, just once, and turned away to tend the pit. The bronze needed 3 days to cool. 3 days of watching, listening, waiting for the faint, telltale sounds that reveal whether a bell is whole beneath the earth or cracked where no eye can see. 3 days of Aldrich pacing the yard at midnight, pressing his ear to the ground above the mold, holding his breath. And in those 3 days, something shifted inside the old founder. Something he'd spent a lifetime walling off. That crack in the runner channel should have destroyed the cast. It would have destroyed it if Aldrich had been working alone. His hands, his eyes, his 35 years of hard-won knowledge, none of it could have reached that fracture in time. Only Tomas could. Only the boy who'd learned to read clay and bronze, not from any book, but from the master who'd taught him since he was 16 years old. On the morning of the 7th of November, the men gathered around the casting pit with hammers and chisels. The cope had to be broken away, the core chipped out, and the bell would either be whole or ruined. Aldrich picked up his hammer, raised it over the mold, and handed it to Tomas.
The time has come.
The first chisel blow against the cope rang across the foundry
I am
like
ready.
a bell itself, or a warning. Clay crumbled, fell away in dry gray chunks, and underneath, a surface emerged, smooth, warm-colored, catching the weak November light like something that had been sleeping underground and was only now opening its eyes. Bronze. Clean, unbroken bronze. No cracks, no voids, no cold shuts where metal had cooled too fast and refused to bond. Tomas worked his way around the mold for 2 hours, tapping and chipping with his good hand, while his right, wrapped in linen and goose grease, throbbed with every heartbeat. Aldrich stood back, watched, and listened. Because a founder doesn't check a bell with his eyes first. A founder checks a bell with his ears. Aldrich stepped to the pit's edge. There it was, 20 hundredweight of bell bronze, still cradled in Norfolk earth, bearing the words Prior Godfrey had demanded around its crown. Prior Godfrey did cause me to be made. Aldrich ran his scarred fingers along the raised letters. Sharp, clean. They'd last centuries. But letters on bronze aren't what make a bell. Sound is. And sound depended on what came next. Medieval bell tuning ranks among the most extraordinary skills the guild system ever produced. Modern founders use electronic frequency analyzers, digital readouts, laser measurements. In 1386, a founder used a hammer and his God-given ear. A properly tuned bell produces 5 distinct tones: the strike note, the hum, the tierce, the quint, and the nominal. All 5 must lock together in harmony. If they don't, bronze must be shaved from the bell's inner surface, fraction by agonizing fraction, until the sound comes right. Shave too much, and the bell is ruined. There's no putting bronze back. Aldrich picked up a small bronze hammer, the same tuning hammer his father had used, and his grandfather before that. The wooden grip worn smooth and dark from 3 generations of palms. The weight of accumulated knowledge in a tool no longer than a man's forearm. He struck the bell. The sound that rose from the casting pit on Pottergate stopped every person in the yard. It started deep, a low, rolling hum you felt in your ribs before you heard it in your ears. Then the overtones opened, one after another, like doors in a corridor. The tierce singing above the fundamental, the quint layering over that, the nominal ringing bright and clean on top. The sound filled the courtyard, rolled over the brick walls, carried down Pottergate to the market stalls and guild halls and churches of Norwich.
She sings. God in heaven, she sings.
The hum held in the air for a full 15 seconds before it faded. When it died, nobody spoke. Ralph leaned on his shovel with his eyes shut. Marjorie pressed one hand flat against her breastbone at the gate. Tomas stared at the bell, this thing he'd helped make from clay and earth and fire, and heard what it had become. The tuning took 4 more days. Aldrich shaved bronze from the inner lip, tiny bright curls falling like shavings from a barber's razor, adjusting each of the 5 tones until they locked in what founders called true harmony. Guild records note the finished bell was pitched at what we'd now call a low D, though Aldrich would never have used that term. He'd have said simply that she spoke with a good voice. And she did. Wat the bell hanger arrived on the 20th of November with a heavy cart, 4 oxen, and a block and tackle rig that looked like it belonged on a ship's mast. The bell was wrapped in straw, loaded with aching care, and hauled 5 miles south along the Heatherset Road, a journey that took most of a cold, gray day. Prior Godfrey met them at the church gate, wrapped in fine wool against the wind.
I told you not to come here.
The bell was hauled into the tower of St. Etheldreda's by ropes and elmwood pulleys, fitted to an oak headstock that Wat had shaped himself, and mounted on iron bearings greased with tallow. The whole village turned out to watch. It took the better part of a raw November day.
You will read your name for the rest of your life.
The first public ringing came at vespers. The sexton pulled the rope. The bell resisted, heavy, stubborn, unwilling, then swung, and the clappers struck. And that voice that Aldrich had first heard in the casting pit filled the Norfolk evening. It rolled across flat fields and bare hedgerows, reached the next village, and the next. People stopped where they stood. Farmers straightened from their work, hands on aching backs. Women came to cottage doorways. Children looked up from their games. Something new had entered the world. A voice that would call this community to prayer, to celebration, to mourning, for generations not yet born.
That's not my voice up in that tower. That's the bronze speaking. We just taught it what to say.
Tomas passed his guild examination the following spring. The record survives, buried in the brazier's ledger, in that same cramped clerk's hand. Tomas, nephew of Aldrich Brazier, examined and found competent in the art and mystery of bell founding, admitted to the guild as master. He went on to cast bells for 30 years across Norfolk and Suffolk. Some still hang in parish churches today. Aldrich died in 1394.
I have poured my
The foundry
heart
on
and soul
Pottergate
into
carried
this,
on under
examiners.
Tomas for
It is
another
ready.
generation, then passed to other
Masterwork,
hands,
young Thomas.
then other trades,
Thank you.
then closed. The buildings became a tanner's yard, then a garden, then simply earth. Archaeology has turned up fragments, crucible shards, loam with horsehair impressions, a broken tuning hammer, buried beneath what's now a quiet residential street in Norwich. Most people who walk above it have no idea what happened there, but the bell endures. 600 years of rain and frost and war and neglect, and it hasn't stopped speaking. Prior Godfrey's inscription is worn almost smooth. You can barely read his name now. The bronze outlasted the vanity, but the sound is exactly what it was on that November evening in 1386. The same 5 tones, the same deep hum, the same voice, calling across the same flat Norfolk fields. And every Sunday morning, when the sexton of St. Etheldreda's reaches for that rope, the air above Heatherset fills with a voice that was born in fire, shaped by scarred hands, and tuned by an ear that understood something written in no guild ledger and recorded in no book. That knowledge passed from grandfather to son to nephew, hand to hand, mouth to ear, master to apprentice. That was Aldrich Brazier's true legacy. Not the inscription, not the bronze, the knowing. And it reaches across 6 centuries to ask us not to let it die.